What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here from Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Today, I am showing off Michael Pramawat's top 4 Night March list from the San Jose Regional Championships. This is for expanded format. This is actually pretty much the same thing as Azul's winning list at that San Jose Regional Championship. 3 out of the top 4 decks were all Night March, and they were all the same exact list, except Azul was playing the Paralyzing Gaze Zoruas from Dark Explorers, which are like $10 cards now, so I could not find them. I do not own them yet, but both Pramawat and Rahul Reddy both played the Ram Zorua in their top 4 list, so technically this is the same list that Rahul and Pramawat played, but other than those Zoruas, it is the exact same list that Azul used to win that regional championship as well. I think Night March is just a mainstay in expanded format. It is, in my eyes, the deck to beat. I think this deck is just absolutely bonkers with the addition of Zoroark GX. Just so good, so strong, very fast, very aggressive. I think Zoroark GX covers a lot of this deck's weaknesses, which I'll be talking about here in the video as I go through the list. So excited to show the list off. Night March is one of my favorite archetypes to have ever existed. I played it for a while after the World Championships in 2015. I was able to do pretty well there with it, and then played it for almost the remainder of that entire next year. Night March had a nice long season there, ended up winning the U.S. National Championships as well, and still is seeing play in expanded format. And even though many counters have been released to try and nerf this deck, it still seems to make it through all of that stuff, just with some strong new additions like Marshadow and Zoroark. So let's take a look at this awesome list that was able to capture 3 out of top 4 spots at the San Jose Regional Championships. First of all, we got a Marshadow GX, just 1 copy. Of course, we've got our 12 Night Marchers, 4 Joltik, 4 Pumpkaboo, and 4 Lampent. We have a 2-2 line of Zoroark GX, and I already mentioned that Azul played the Paralyzing Gaze Zorua from Dark Explorers, but that Zorua is very expensive, so these Ram Zoruas work just fine. Also, 3 copies of Shaman EX and 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX. So let's talk about this deck a little bit. For those of you that don't know Night March is just an attack with all these basic Pokemon here. You know, we've got Pumpkaboo and Joltik. Lampent also has the Night March attack, but we don't ever attack with Lampent. You just use him to throw into the discard. Joltik and Pumpkaboo are your main attackers, and they can perform Night March. Night March reads, this attack does 20 damage times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile that have the Night March attack. So the whole point of the deck is to pitch your Night Marchers, or, any of these 12 Pokemon, to the discard pile and power up your Night March attack. So if you have 9 Night Marchers in the discard pile, you're going to be doing 180 damage. If you have 10 Night Marchers in the discard pile, you're going to be doing 200 damage. If you have 11 Night Marchers in the discard pile, 220, and so on and so forth. This deck used to cap out at 220 damage. Say you didn't prize any Night Marchers and you put all of them in the discard pile without the addition of, Fighting Fury Belt or Choice Band, you were going to be doing 220 damage. However, with the release of Marshadow GX and that Shadow Hunt ability, you can use the attacks of your Pokemon that are in the discard pile. So Shadow Hunt reads, this Pokemon can use the attacks of any basic Pokemon in your discard pile, and you still need the necessary energy to use those attacks. So with Marshadow in deck, you could pitch all 12 Night Marchers into the discard pile, and you can use Night March, copying Joltik's Night March because it only costs a double colorless, and you could copy that for a massive 240 damage. If you have a Choice Band on your Marshadow, that's 270 damage. So Marshadow allows this deck to hit some insane numbers that just weren't possible because you always used to have a Night Marcher in play and could not put 12 Night Marchers in the discard pile. So Marshadow, awesome inclusion. Not only that, Marshadow hits for fighting weakness, which is great because you have excellent type coverage with this deck now. Marshadow makes it so that you can hit for fighting weakness. Joltik obviously allows you to hit for lightning weakness. Pumpkaboo, you can hit for psychic weakness. And now with Zoroark GX, you can also hit for dark weakness, which is so good, especially against Trevenant decks. Trevenant break decks have traditionally been a huge problem for Night March, just since they can get that item lock on the first turn of the game. And Night Marchers can have just a horrible time surviving those Silent Fears, which just spread 30 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. And, obviously, our Night Marchers have a very small amount of hit points. Pumpkaboo goes down after 2 Silent Fears, Joltik just 1, and Night Marches and Marshadow is weak to Psychic. So lots of problems there with Trevenant. On the other side, Zoroark GX resists Psychic. Doesn't matter for Silent Fear, but for that Tree Slam attack, you are going to be resisting Psychic and hits Trevenant for weakness. Also, Zoroark GX attacks for just a double colorless energy with that Riotous Beating attack. Riotous Beating does 20 damage times the amount of Pokemon that you have in play. So it maxes out at just 120 damage, but that is more than enough to be able to knock out a Trevenant when you're playing against Trevenant, since you are hitting for double damage against Trevenant. Zoroark GX does so much more than just offer this deck a darkness type attacker, though. That trade ability is why Zoroark GX is here. Trade allows you once during your turn before you attack to discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. Night March is just a huge combo deck. You're always trying to hit certain card combinations. Not only are you trying to hit puzzles so that you can get more resources back from the discard pile, you're trying to hit Versus Seekers in order to pull off crazy Guzma plays and things like that. So trade just allows you to continue milling through your deck late into the game. You can't get end late game, because if you get end to 1, end to 2, you're still going to be able to trade to up your hand size, then maybe hit an Ultra Ball for Shaman, and go off from there. So Zoroark GX just allows you to play your deck very aggressively, allows you to always hit those card combinations that you need in order to win the game. But it also provides this deck something extraordinarily useful in that trade discards cards from your hand, and Night Marchers need to be in the discard pile in order for you to do a significant amount of damage. So trade just gives this deck another option to continue discarding Night Marchers throughout the course of the game, especially with cards like Karen in format that make you shuffle all your Pokemon from the discard pile back into the deck. So Zoroark GX has just made this deck even more resilient to Karen plays from the opponent, since you have the option to continue drawing and to continue discarding Night Marchers late into the game. Zoroark GX just really complements this deck in some extraordinary ways and makes this deck a whole new beast to reckon with. So I think Zoroark GX is what makes this deck just such a competitor in expanded format right now. And if you haven't tried playing Night March with Zoroark GX yet, I highly recommend it. The amount of plays, the crazy plays that you can pull off with trade now are just absolutely stunning, totally insane. And I find myself being able to have access to pretty much my entire deck. Whatever I wanted to make happen, I could pretty much make happen with the Night March deck once you set up Zoroark GX. So it's very insane for that. We do still play 3 copies of Shaman EX and 1 copy of Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele and Shaman, they do help kind of buff out Zoroark GX's Riotous Beating attack, so you can put these onto the bench and increase those numbers if you're playing against a deck where Riotous Beating is going to be your best option. But these are your consistency cards. For the most part, you're going to be using Shaman to set up to hit those crazy plays, like I said. Also, just to get to draw into cards aggressively. That's what Night March does best. You need to draw into cards aggressively in order to attack for big numbers, and ideally you're going to be attacking 3 times, knocking out 3 Pokemon EX or GX, and then just ending the game very swiftly. And Shaman allows you to do that. You can also Sky Return things with Shaman if you happen to not have quite enough Pokemon in the discard pile, Night Marchers in the discard pile. You could Sky Return loop pretty easily with Shaman. That's a strategy versus Trevenant that is very useful. And with access to Zoroark GX, the Sky Return strategy is even more possible than it used to be, because you could just, remove your liability, remove your Shaman from the bench, attack into Trevenant that way, maybe attack into a Bursting Balloon or something like that with Sky Return, and then, promote another Shaman and go from there. So these are valid options that you have, especially with Zoroark GX, as a way to continue drawing through your hand, drawing through your deck. Shaman EX, awesome for setup, awesome for late game plays as well. Like I said, trade into Ultra Ball. A lot of times you can just use Shaman to set up for the remainder of your deck to pull off the game-winning play you need. Tapu Lele GX, awesome for that Wonder Tag ability, just being able to search out whatever supporter you want out of your deck. Next, I'm going to be showing off the supporters. We do have a lot of one-of supporters in this deck that are very, very cool, and Tapu Lele helps you search those out. So let's take a look at the supporters. First of all, we've got 3 copies of Professor Juniper. Just obviously discard your hand, refresh for 7 new cards. Very strong in a deck that wants to draw aggressively and also get things into the discard pile. Some early Night March lists had gone all the way down to 2 Junipers or 2 Sycamores, but I think, with item lock being prevalent, 3 hard copies of Juniper or Sycamore is very important. I also play 1 copy of Hex Maniac, 1 copy of Teammates, 1 copy of Guzma, 1 copy of N, 1 copy of Lysander, and 1 copy of Getsis. So 6 one-of supporters and 3 Junipers. I love the supporter breakdown in this deck. I think that obviously Juniper is very good. That's a mainstay. But I love that we play all these options that we have. This makes our Versus Seekers very powerful throughout the course of the game. You could use Battle Compressor to ditch these supporters into the discard pile and then just always have access to just a whole host of options with Versus Seeker and Puzzle of Time throughout the course of the game. I love having the option to either Lysander or Guzma. You don't always have the free retreat. You don't always have a Floatstone on the bench or something like that to make Guzma the optimal play. So sometimes Lysander is the optimal play, but then sometimes you'll get something like a Shaman or a Zoroark stuck in the active, and you want to Night March that turn, which makes Guzma your optimal supporter as well. So I do like having a 1-1 split. I think that that's very important. I've played with it, love it. There are definitely situations where Lysander is optimal and definitely situations where Guzma is optimal. 1 copy of N is fine. Usually Night March is going to be playing more aggressive cards like Juniper or Lysander or Guzma or Teammates, but N is definitely needed to be able to limit the opponent's resources as games start to come down to the wire. Make sure that your opponent can't just take cheap knockouts on your Shaman EXs or on your Zoroark GXs or things like that. Also, N, just a great shuffle draw card. Sometimes you got those weird hands with like 3 double colorless in them, and you need to shuffle draw in order to refresh your hand and kind of start new. Teammates helps chain those double colorless energies. Night Marchers are going to be getting knocked out almost every single turn. Teammates just allows you to go and get 2 cards from the deck after a Pokemon was knocked out the previous turn. A lot of times that's going to be double colorless energy and something else. Sometimes it's just 2 puzzles of time to allow you to get 2 cards back from the discard pile as well. Teammates really helps put those puzzles together and allows you to make the most out of them. So I really love Teammates in this deck. It's a momentum keeper. I really, really love that. Getsis, I was unsure of at first. I've never really been a fan of Getsis, but this deck draws so incredibly all the time with Shaman in deck, with Zoroark GX in deck, that there are some turns where you simply just don't need to play a supporter, and that you can afford to just Getsis to try and haze your opponent to make them shuffle all their items back into their deck. You can easily just win a game if your opponent happens to be sitting on a Versus Seeker instead of a supporter for the turn, and they're depending on relying on that Versus Seeker to draw cards next turn, and you catch them off guard with the Getsis real quick. They have to shuffle the Versus Seeker back into their deck, and all of a sudden now they have a dud hand, and you can just go and overwhelm them from there. So I love Getsis in the deck, and I think the difference maker for me is having access to Zoroark GX. Zoroark GX means that you could draw cards even if you only Getsis for 1 or 2. If you have Zoroark GX set up, you're going to be trading and drawing even more cards. So I think there are more opportunities to Getsis now than there ever have been. Early Getsis also very strong. So I am a believer in Getsis now, and I do see why this card was so good in this deck. Finally, we have Hex Maniac as well. Hex is great for shutting off abilities if you happen to be playing against a deck with abilities in expanded format. Expanded format is just so big that there are so many decks. If you want to beat something, kind of weird like Greninja or Archie's Blastoise, you're going to want to have Hex Maniac in the deck to make sure that you're shutting off those abilities. Also just great for shutting off trade or, Shaman setup, things like that, to try and make it so your opponent can't pull off any sort of power plays on the following turn. If playing against an electric deck as well. There are just a lot of ability decks in expanded format. Also, if you're playing against a Trevenant deck, want to break that Trevenant item lock as well. A lot of options to things to shut off in expanded format, and Hex is just a very safe card to play in expanded format because of how big and diverse the format is. Moving on to the items, we do play 4 Puzzles of Time. Puzzle of Time is just insane in this deck. I mean, you need to play 4 just to be able to get your resources back from the discard pile. The amount of power plays that you can pull off with Puzzle of Time is just absolutely insane. 4 Battle Compressor. Battle Compressor is just a totally busted card in this deck as well. Obviously, a deck that revolves around pitching Pokemon into the discard pile is going to love 4 copies of Battle Compressor. 4 copies of Ultra Ball. You know, obviously, you go get your Shaymins, your Tapu Leles, set up your Zoroarks, you know, discard cards. Nothing not to love about that. 1 copy of Dowsing Machine, 1 Floatstone, 1 Choice Band, 1 Special Charge, 1 Field Blower, and 4 copies of Versus Seeker, and 3 copies of Trainer's Mail, and 2 Dimension Valley. So ton of items. Let's go ahead and check these out, get these sorted appropriately. Like I said, Puzzle of Time, you know, need that to be able to recover these resources, and look how many resources we have to recover. So many targets for Puzzle of Time in this deck, you know, and it just makes the deck so versatile and so flexible. Puzzle of Time means that if you want, you could play multiple copies of Choice Band throughout the course of the game. You could play multiple copies of Floatstone. You could play a 5th and a 6th Battle Compressor. If you wanted to, you could play 3 copies of Field Blower, right? With Dowsing Machine in the mix as well, that means that we have even more flexible plays for playing our puzzles. You can play, you know, double puzzle, and then even if you've prized a puzzle or something like that, then you could still Dowsing Machine for a puzzle back in order to double puzzle again. So Dowsing Machine really makes the puzzle plays just so much better, and I really like it for that. But also in a pinch, it just gives you another out to get a single item back. So you could potentially double puzzle for a Field Blower back once. Use your Field Blower once, double puzzle for a Field Blower back again. That's 2 uses. Double puzzle for a Field Blower back a 3rd time. That's 3 uses. Then you could Dowsing Machine for it. So you could use Field Blower 4 times, you know, with Dowsing Machine and puzzles in deck. And that just kind of shows how insane the resource usage is in this deck. I mean, just with all these recovery cards, you could really make the most out of these 1-ofs. And you can see why we play, you know, so many 1-ofs in this deck, especially Choice Band too. Just giving you that plus 30 makes it so that it doesn't matter so much if you prize some Night Marchers. Having the option to increase your damage output by 30 can really help you hit some high numbers while also conserving Battle Compressors in case your opponent plays cards like Karen. These decks used to play like 2 copies of Fighting Fury Belt, but I think I was never really super hype on Fighting Fury Belt. You know, giving a Joltik 70 hit points is like kind of a neat trick, but ultimately didn't, you know, I didn't feel like it was like the best usage for that damage modifier. Only giving you plus 10 didn't really matter in a lot of circumstances. I love the 1 inclusion of Choice Band in this deck to help boost those numbers. 1 copy of Floatstone is seems a little sketchy. Night March used to play 2 copies of Floatstone, but anymore I don't even think it very much matters. With trade being able to just churn through your deck, the landscape of this deck has changed. I think the deck just draws so much more aggressively now than it used to, that you can find your 1 copy of Floatstone or Guzma. And I think that's the real game changer, is that you can use Guzma as a switch card, so you don't need to play 2 copies of Floatstone anymore, since Guzma can help get Pokemon out of the active position as well. So the 1 copy of Floatstone works just fine. We also play 1 copy of Special Charge, making your double colorless energy go much further, obviously, and then you don't have to waste your puzzles on getting back DCEs necessarily, because you do have the option to play 6 double colorless energy with Special Charge without even having to use a puzzle to get 1 back. So that allows your puzzles to be freed up for more aggressive plays like Battle Compressor, Versus Seeker, things like that, which makes a big difference. We're also playing 3 copies of Trainer's Mail. Trainer's Mail is just an awesome card for completing those card combinations, double puzzle plays, finding Ultra Balls, finding Battle Compressors. This just basically makes your deck much smaller. You know, if you Sycamore or Juniper or whatever, and you miss a card that you need, but you got a Trainer's Mail, that means you could dig 4 deeper to try and find that Battle Compressor that you might need to take a crucial knockout on on a certain turn. With trade in the mix, you could trade and then trainer's mail, and that is the correct order. Usually if you're digging for something, you want to trade first, you draw the 2 cards and then trainer's mail, because that guarantees that you are looking at 6 unique cards. Whereas if you were to trainer's mail first and then, grab a card, shuffle the rest in, then maybe you could trade and get 2 of those cards that, that you just saw with trainer's mail that you don't want. So trainer's mail combines with trade just to give this deck some crazy reach. With Shaman EX as well, you could trainer's mail, hit an ultra ball for Shaman. I mean, you could draw into whatever you want with this deck, and I really do mean it when I say that it feels like you have the option to hit almost anything that you want on any given turn with the options that you have in this deck. And finally, we played 2 copies of Dimension Valley. This is how you actually attack with Pumpkaboo. You may have noticed that Pumpkaboo's Night March attack costs 3 energy, not like Joltik's 2. So you do need Dimension Valley in play in order to attack with Pumpkaboo for just 1 double colorless energy. Dimension Valley makes it so that Psychic Pokemon's attacks cost 1 colorless less. But 2 Dimension Valley is fine just for the occasional time that you want to attack with Pumpkaboo, or maybe start it and want to just attack with it, or if you're playing against maybe a fighting deck or something like that, or a deck that snipes and you're afraid to put your Joltics down, you can lean on Pumpkaboo in the 2 copies of Dimension Valley. With Dowsing Machine and Puzzles, 2 is plenty of Dimension Valley. You draw into it easy enough, and then you can always get them back from the discard pile with your recovery cards there. And finally, we do play 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy, and that's it for the energy. Old Night March decks used to play copies of Basic Energy and Mew EX so that you could copy Joltik's Night March attack for just 1 energy and perform it with the Basic Energy. But anymore, now we're using Special Charge, Double Colorless Energy only, and Marshadow to copy that Night March's attack from the discard pile. So that's it for that regional winning top 4, whatever you want to call it. It's basically the same list, Night March list from the San Jose Regional Championships. I think this is going to be a very strong deck and a deck to look out for heading into the upcoming year. So make sure to test against it, test with it, and see how you like it. Let me know what you guys think of Night March in the comments below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace.